Hello, you're watching Tell It Like It Is, and my name is Kathy Benuck. Today's show is part of a new series that we're doing called The Final Sprint for Gubernatorial Nominations, and it will feature our second round of interviews with those people who do want to be the next governor of New Hampshire. The first series that we did was titled Race to the State House, and we taped that in May, and all of those shows are available on the BCTV website at www.bedfordtv.com. And the shows were done with all 5 gubernatorial candidates, the 2 Republicans, Over Lamontagne and Kevin Smith, and with the 3 Democrats, Jackie Silly, Maggie Hassan, and Bill Kennedy. Now, in those shows, we kind of discussed the backgrounds of each candidate and the major positions that they were taking. And as time allowed, I asked each candidate basically kind of the same general questions so that viewers could sit down and compare them. Take the time to watch those shows, or if you've seen them already, watch them again, even if you've already think you remember them all, because as the primary election draws closer, it's really important to know each candidate in his or her position on important issues. This is a big year in New Hampshire. We're going to have a new governor in January, and it's very important that we all do our due diligence to put the right person in there. Now, again, those shows are on the BCTV website at www.bedfordtv.com. Now, today's series is going to be slightly different than the past one. First of all, I will not waste precious time giving the biographical information on each candidate, because you can get those by watching those first shows. Secondly, while some questions to candidates may be similar, primarily my questions are going to be more relevant to each candidate and to the evolving campaign of each candidate. Third, the series will not this time include Maggie Hassan. Unfortunately, we just could not arrive at a date when she would be available for a show taping. So it is what it is, and unfortunately she's not here. And fourth, as I mentioned, no biographies will be given today, but instead what I'd like to do is tell you about the endorsements that each candidate has received, because it gives you kind of a good sense of the type of support that they're building. Now, my guest right now is Republican candidate Kevin Smith. You know, only a few months ago, a lot of people in New Hampshire were unfamiliar with Kevin Smith, but boy, has that changed. In fact, this week, one of his major endorsers is stumping here in New Hampshire for him, and that would be the inimitable former New York City mayor and presidential candidate Rudy Giuliani. Quite a catch. Other high-powered endorsers are former New Hampshire Governor Craig Benson, former Congressman Bill Zeliff, Assistant New Hampshire House Majority Leader, Steve Stepanek. I always pronounce his name wrong, and sorry, Steve, if you hear this. Former House Leader and Transportation Committee Chairman Sherm Packard, and many important chairmen of important House committees. Also campaigning for him is Jackie Whitten, who recently received nationwide news coverage after being fired from her convenience store job here in New Hampshire for not accepting an electronic benefits transfer card for the purchase of alcohol and cigarettes. Kevin.
Kathy.
Welcome back.
You can keep going for the next half hour.
You like
I don't
that?
have to say anything. It was very good.
Well, thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me back.
It's
great to see you on this beautiful new set that you have
here.
You
like it, huh?
I feel a little like Regis and Kelly with you right now. If
we
this
have
governor
to
thing doesn't work
that.
out, yeah, well, we do have to behave better than that.
If it doesn't work out, let's start a show
Well,
together.
maybe we can do that.
We could.
Look out, New York.
Yeah, there you go. Tell Rudy, we'll have him as
That's
one
right.
of our first guests. Now, the whole question of the CBT thing, which I just mentioned, abuse, and it really points to your whole plan to demand a whole lot more accountability within state government. Now, going back to the EBT, Terry Smith, whose Division of Family Assistance within New Hampshire Health and Human Services, he oversees the EBT cards. Yeah. And I've seen him interviewed, and he indicates that the only way to end abuse is to give his division a bigger infrastructure, more money, more staff, and bigger travel budgets. What do you say to this mindset that will do our job if you throw more funding at
Well,
us.
you know, look, I know Terry. He's a nice guy. I worked with Terry at Health and Human Services, but I respectfully disagree with how we can get more accountability out of the system.
I thought you might.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is look, there has to be accountability in this because there's widespread abuse right now that we're finding out. And this is the kind of thing that burns the taxpayer because, you know, the reality is most taxpayers are okay with helping the most vulnerable and the most needy in our society, and they want to make sure that there's a safety net there for them, but they don't want it to be abused. And frankly, they want to make sure that people who need the resources and need that assistance, that it's there for those people and not for the ones who are going to abuse the system. Channel 9 recently did a great investigation on this. And I would encourage anyone who hasn't seen it to go and try to find it on their website. Hopefully they have it up there because, you know, this is not a partisan issue and it should not be a partisan issue. And what Channel 9 found is that there's been widespread ATM use of the EBT cards in something like 35 states, including somewhere in the Virgin Islands as well.
In the winter while the rest of us were up here working.
That's right, Kathy. And so the reality is we need to have accountability and checks and balances on this. Now, I've talked to former Commissioner John Stephen about it because he was intimately close about it, and I worked under John as well. And John told me this is one of the biggest frustrations he had as commissioner, is that it was very difficult to get more restrictions on it because the monies that are being used on the EBT cards are both a mix of federal and state funds. And when it's federal funding that's in there, you know, you have to get approval from the feds to be able to put the restrictions on it. And so what I've said in talking to John about it is that, you know, as soon as I take office, I'm going to be working with Nick Tumpus, who's the commissioner of HHS, and tell him you're going to apply for a waiver from the federal government, as other states have done, to start putting restrictions on this money because it's high time we do this. I mean, we have to be able to track where these monies are going. I don't think it should be used as an ATM card. I think that just opens it up for abuse to occur. I mean, if you're going to allow that, you might as well just send them the cash in the mail if you're going to allow them to use it at an ATM machine. And you know what? And Jackie Whiten from Antrim, who brought so much of this to light in the very beginning, I mean, she was fired from her job for doing the right thing. And she ought to be commended for it because she stood up for the taxpayers and said, this isn't right. Even if you're allowed to purchase alcohol with this card, I'm not going to sell it to you because as a taxpayer, I'm going to be looking out for where these funds are actually going. And like I said, she ought to be commended for it. And it's high time we put accountability in the system on these cards.
And you're right, the public perception is horrible because between one of the cases Channel 9 referred to was somebody over a 3-month period, I believe, in Florida.
Yeah.
So obviously
That's
wintering there.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it angers most of us to hear that they can go into a strip club or a head shop or whatever and get their cash out.
Well, and they were saying that a number of the ATM withdrawals were done at bars, they were done at casinos. So I mean, you put 2 and 2 together. It's not like they're just using the ATM in those places.
No, not buying milk and bread for the kids.
No, they're certainly not, Kathy. So it demands accountability, and that's again something that I would make a priority as governor because, as I said before, there are people in our community who legitimately need this assistance. They're not abusing the system, but you know what? They can't even get the resources that they really deserve because you have other people out there that are abusing the system. Much like the same thing with the Medicaid system.
Right.
I mean, LexisNexis did a whole independent study of this a number of months ago and found out right now the state could be losing anywhere from $10 to $40 million a year and Medicaid fraud. And the only way we're going to fix that is by making sure we upgrade our technologies at the department so that we're catching the cheaters at the front door. Because once they go into the system, Kathy, it becomes very difficult to recoup any of those monies. In fact, you probably would expend more in resources just trying to track it down than you would actually get back. You have to catch the people that are trying to fraud the system at the front door. And we're only going to do that if we upgrade our technology so that we can cross-check databases around the country, something we don't do right now, something that LexisNexis was able to do. That's how they found all the abuse in the system. We have to do that as a state as well.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Now, I know that you have a 4-part economic plan to make New Hampshire more business friendly. and to cut both the business enterprise tax and the business profit tax.
Yep.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about the plan
Sure.
and what you see as replacing the revenues
Yeah.
that would be lost through
Absolutely.
the lowering of the business taxes?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, look, New Hampshire has the 5th highest business taxes in the country. We're a very high business tax state. We balance a good portion of our budget on the backs of business tax owners. And what I've said is that if we are going to make New Hampshire the most economically competitive state in the country, if we're going to lure more jobs, more industries from outside of New Hampshire into here, we've got to make it an attractive place to do business. And right now it's not. You know, we have the best quality of life. We know that. CNBC recently came out with their rankings of best states to do business in. And they had all these subcategories. And if you look at them, quality of life in New Hampshire, it's #1. Cost of doing business, we're 35th. Infrastructure, we're something like 45th.
That low?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it's not very good. In terms of having skilled labor, we're very low as well. Cost of living is very high. So the reality is, while we're a great state to live in, we're not a great state to be doing business in right now. We've got to change that. And one of the ways we will change that is by lowering our corporate tax rate. That's why I've called for a very aggressive phase down of both the business profits tax and the enterprise tax, lowering the profits tax to 5% by the year 2020, lowering the business enterprise tax. It's a tax on payroll. Most small businesses pay it, even those small businesses that don't make a profit in the state of New Hampshire are paying the business enterprise tax, reducing that to 0.25% over 7 years. So that will be not only more competitive in the region, but competitive nationally as well. And let me go back to your revenue question, because it's a very important question. You know, one of the reasons why Mayor Giuliani, who you mentioned at the beginning, is coming up to stump for me is because I've modeled this after a lot of what he did in New York City, and that they had one of the highest corporate tax rates in the city when he took office.
I remember that.
And he said, I'm going to slash corporate tax rates over the next 8 years, and you will see revenues will grow from business taxes by slashing them than what we would have had if we kept them at the same level. And sure enough, if you look at business tax revenue over 8 years while the mayor was there, by the end of his administration, New York City had more money coming in business tax revenue than what he started out at, even though they had marginally cut down the corporate tax rate. And I have no doubt that would happen in the state of New Hampshire. The reality is, in the first year alone, it's not going to happen in the first year alone, okay? We're probably going to lose about $60 million in tax revenue by beginning to phase it down, which I've said there's no reason why. I know from having worked in state government, there's still inefficiencies that can be found to make up for that revenue. And one of the places I would go to was a 2003 study. It was a governor's commissions on finding inefficiencies in state government. Great study, made wonderful recommendations. Found in the first year alone, if you implemented a lot of their recommendations, you could save $74 million in 1 year. It was $420 million over 5 years.
And that was figures of
That
a
was
long
in
time ago.
2003 numbers, exactly.
Yeah.
That study's been sitting on a bookshelf somewhere for the last 8 years collecting dust. And what I've said is we need to get that study back off the bookshelf and start implementing a number of these things, because a lot of it hasn't been, and we'll save money right there on the state level. But again, I have all the confidence in the world that you would see by the year, say fiscal year 2015-16, that as New Hampshire starts becoming a more business-friendly place, which includes lowering those business taxes, you're going to see the revenues start going up on the business tax side. We're not going to have to keep looking. I mean, we should always be looking for inefficiencies. But in other words, we're not going to keep losing revenue year over year because we're lowering the tax rate. You're going to start seeing it going up as we reduce it, because your economic base expands. Companies that are here in New Hampshire will be keeping more of their money. They'll be growing more jobs, doing more business. And companies outside of New Hampshire are going to start looking at us going, you know, that Granite State, they're doing a good job at getting businesses there. You know, I have an undergirding philosophy, Kathy, that state government itself doesn't create jobs. But what state government does is it creates the environment and economic climate to determine whether or not good jobs are going to be created in the private sector. And that's what we have to do, is make sure we create the climate for good jobs to be created here.
Okay. Now, not only in New Hampshire do we need insurance reforms to lower the high cost of health care, but we need a plan now to relieve us from the potential new costs related to Obamacare, like the potential addition of 50,000 people to the state's Medicaid rolls. What reforms do you think are going to work? And as governor, I know that there's still some confusion nationwide, but what options do you think you might be able to have with regard to Obamacare?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, this is this is a huge issue
It
that
is.
we're going to be faced with as a state over the next few years. I mean, the biggest reform we can do this November is put a new president in there and get a majority in the Senate that will repeal Obamacare, because it will then empower the states to do what we can do on a state level to decrease the cost of health insurance, because we need to do that as a state right now. I have said that I would oppose any expansion of Medicaid as a state. I mean, as it is right now, New Hampshire reimburses Medicaid at some of the lowest levels in the entire country, let alone bringing a whole new segment, a whole new population onto the Medicaid rolls. It will bankrupt the state of New Hampshire. And frankly, it's just a precursor to having a single payer system anyway. You know, and to the folks that say, oh, well, the federal government says they're going to reimburse at 100% the first 3 years and then only ratchet it down to 90% thereafter. Kathy, give me a break. We've been waiting for them to fully fund special ed at 40% since 1975.
You're right.
They passed the IDEA Act that said they would fund special ed in all of the states at 40%. You know what they've been averaging for the last 30 years? 17%.
Wow.
So they can't even meet their obligation to fund it at 40% with special ed. On top of that, they've racked up a $15 trillion debt. And we expect that they're going to pay 100% of the increased Medicaid costs in all the states. I mean, you'd really have to be gullible to believe that. And I'm not going to put the state of New Hampshire in a position where we're going to bankrupt the state because the feds go, oh, we don't have the money to be able to pay for it. States, you're on the hook for it. And that's why I'm adamantly opposed to that. However, we still do need to find a way to make health care more affordable.
Yes.
Obamacare didn't do that, and we have to do that both as a country and as a state as well. You know, New Hampshire consistently is ranked one of the healthiest states, if not the healthiest state in the country, but we also pay some of the highest health insurance costs in the country as well. In fact, if you went on Anthem Blue Cross's website today, and you compare same plans in Virginia and the state of New Hampshire, you would see that the costs are less than half the amount in Virginia as they are in the state of New Hampshire. Same exact plan.
Wow.
Less than half for the same plan, Kathy. And the reason for that is twofold. One, Virginia doesn't require all the service mandates that New Hampshire does. And that was something that was started by then Senator Jean Shaheen and continued when she became governor, and Governor Lynch continued with that as well. I mean, we've artificially inflated the cost of health insurance in this state by saying to the insurance companies, you have to have all of these service mandates. And by the way, it's also what drove out all of the competition. I mean, we essentially have 2.5 health insurance carriers in the state, so you have a duopoly that's fixing the prices of health insurance, whereas in other states there's a lot more competition. It helps drive down the prices. You know, for instance, maternity coverage is something that's required in all group plans in the state of New Hampshire. Now, it's not in Virginia, so what does this mean? If you wanted to get an individual plan for health insurance in the state of Virginia and you wanted maternity coverage as a rider, you would pay an additional $71 a month for that. In New Hampshire, individual plan, maternity coverage as a rider, it's an additional $650 a month.
Are you kidding?
No, I'm not. I mean, and anyone, like I said, anyone can go on the website and check it out for themselves.
Wow.
So what we need to do, it is staggering. And so again, you have to diagnose the problem and say, well, how did we get here as a state that insurance is so costly? Because this is killing small businesses. I mean, look, I'm a small business owner. I'm self-employed. I pay a little over $17,000 a year out of pocket right now.
And that's brutal.
It is brutal. And I talk to a lot of small business owners as I'm traveling the state, and I ask them, what are you paying for health insurance? And many of them have said to me, Kevin, kids are out of the house. We don't purchase it.
I think more and more people are taking their chances.
Well, they are.
Yes.
They are taking their chances.
Absolutely.
Because they're going, well, we hope nothing catastrophic happens. We're knocking on wood and just hoping nothing happens. That's unacceptable. That's the choice. The choice is either not have health insurance or it's so high it's gonna bankrupt you. One of the things we can do as a state, I believe, is allow the insurance companies to offer their employees flexible plans based on what their needs are. If you want a plan that has all of the mandates in it, well, fine, you can purchase that plan if that's what fits your needs. And if you want a plan, if you're a 25-year-old male, you're not married, you probably don't need maternity coverage.
True.
But perhaps you want to... We hope. That's right. Yeah, you never know in this day and age. But, look, you probably would want a catastrophic plan, if that was the case. Or maybe you want something in the middle. But you should be allowed to purchase, a plan tailored to your needs. And the other thing is allow insurance carriers to offer health insurance outside to compete in our market. You know, if they're outside the state of New Hampshire, open the borders up, allow them to compete in New Hampshire. That's not something we do right now. But those are some, you know, free market reforms that I think would work in the state to start finally bringing down the cost of health insurance, because it is just so costly in our state right now.
And it's obviously something that has to be challenged.
It
obviously.
does. And the other thing too is that there's no reason why I don't think that we shouldn't allow small business owners that have under 50 employees to be able to pool together and purchase health insurance as a group, you know, to get health insurance at lower costs. You know, we can't do, small business owners that don't have that many employees can't do that right now in the state. I think it would be great if we were able to allow them to do that.
Now, we would be remiss if we didn't hit on education. You're the dad of a young family.
Yeah.
So you're personally affected by what may be the shortfalls and the needs of the public education system. What do you think right now are the most pressing issues in New Hampshire, and what are the things we need to do about them?
Well, you know, if people go onto my website, they'll see I have a very comprehensive health.
I was hoping you'd say that.
Education reform plan.
Yes.
I mean, it's a 16-point reform plan. And, you know, I mean, I would say compare my plan for education reform versus my opponent's plan, which is, I think, all of 3 sentences on his website. We do need to solve the education funding issue through a funding amendment. And that's something, as governor, I would continue to push for, because I do believe we need targeted aid of education funding in our state. You know, make sure the aid's going to the communities that need it the most, and those that, you know, don't need it the most would get less aid. But the reality is right now you have towns that perhaps don't need as much money as they're getting, but they're still getting it because the courts had said every town needs to get the same amount of state funding.
Yes.
That is not the way we've ever done it in New Hampshire, but it's the way we're doing it right now because the courts got involved with it. But beyond that, Kathy, I mean, that's where my plan just begins. There's so much more reform that we need to do in terms of education. For instance, I've been a strong advocate for a long time in school choice. I believe a rising tide raises all boats. And I'm tired of hearing people who say, well, if you're pro-school choice, you're somehow anti-public education. Nothing could be further from the truth. I was educated in the public school system. I taught in the public school system. Same with my wife. She's been a special ed teacher in the public school system. Our kids go to the public school system. But as I said before, I believe you bring more competition into the system, a rising tide will raise all boats. That's why I have a plan on there called Money Follows the Child, where instead of the public funding for education going to the local school districts, it goes directly to the parents. It empowers the parents to put the money to allow their child to go to the school of their choice. It creates more competition, and this is what's best for the children. We know this. Every child learns differently. And every child should have the opportunity to learn in the best learning environment where they can excel the best. I mean, if you look at charter schools right now, we have a growing charter school community in our state. And these charter schools are doing a fantastic job on very limited funding that they're getting right now from the state. If you look at the Seacoast Charter School out in Kingston, I mean, their enrollment's been going up year over year for the last 5 years. There are over 200 students right now, but there is a 500 student waiting list to get into that school.
Massive.
It tells you that the demand is there. Parents want to be able to have more choice, and I think we should, you know, allow them to do that. I think we need tenure reform as well. You know, I think tenure ought to be based on performance evaluations of teachers. Other states are doing this now. It's not saying you can't have tenure, you can get tenure, but you've got to be able to earn it. And if you have a pattern of low performance evaluations, if you're consistently in the bottom 10%, then I say you lose tenure. And you have an opportunity to earn it back, but it shouldn't be something that you have necessarily for an entire lifetime. Again, there needs to be accountability. And this, you know, again, it's you have to look at ed reform in its totality. It's not just, because a lot of times people just want to go after the teachers. The reality is most teachers are phenomenal teachers, but you have some that are not, and they need to be held accountable for that. But it's a you know, a parental issue as well. You know, parents need to be much more involved in their child's education, and that's not necessarily something that you can legislate. But certainly I think we need to empower teachers and empower administrators as well to be able to hold parents accountable for those that are not, you know, if kids are not coming in with their homework done, well, that's a problem.
Yes,
you know, the parents need to be involved when their child comes home after school. Their education doesn't just stop at 2 o'clock, 2:30, or 3 o'clock, depending on what time school's over. It continues beyond that, and parents need to be very involved in their child's education as well. So again, you know, I would encourage folks, go onto my website, look at my ed reform plan. It's a pretty comprehensive plan. I want to make sure the state of New Hampshire is outputting the best and brightest students in the world, okay? And that also means, too, setting our own high standards. Let's not get dictates from Washington and settle for mediocrity with the, you know, the goals that are coming out of Washington. Why are we following Washington's lead on this? We in New Hampshire know best how to educate our children in New Hampshire. And so we should empower those folks at the local levels as much as possible, but set our own high standards as a state, as I said, to make sure that we're outputting the best and brightest. You know, one of the big concerns I have is we have a great community college system in New Hampshire right now, but in one of their very recent reports, one of the issues they raise is that they're now having to allocate more resources to offering remedial classes because incoming freshmen are not proficient in the areas of math and English. So what is this saying, Kathy? Somehow we've got students that are graduating from the high school level that are going into post-secondary school, and those schools are saying, we can't go any further until we get them proficient in math and English, because they're not right now. We need to examine that, and we need to do something about it quick as a state, because we love to tout the fact that we've got one of the highest graduation rates in the country, but if they're graduating and they're not proficient in the core areas we expect them to be, well, it doesn't matter how many we're graduating. It should be about what's the knowledge base that they have once they leave here, once they leave school.
Now, I'm looking at the clock, and I'd love to throw this question at you, but you'd have to answer it fast, because I want you to be able to say to the voters why they need to give you the vote.
Sure.
In just not that many days, since September 11th. But I know one of the big things that you've expressed a lot of concern about, and you've even used the words alarming rate, is the number of younger people who are not staying in New Hampshire and leaving.
Right.
And I know you have barely any time to answer it, but can you give an elevator quick answer to that?
We do. You know, New Hampshire's lost more young people, 18 to 34-year-olds, over the last 10 years than any other state in the country. We're the third oldest population right now. We have a higher median age than the state of Florida. We need to find a way to retain our young people after they finish school, to keep them working here in New Hampshire. That's why I've said we've got to be very strategic about partnering the business community, the private sector, with our post-secondary schools and our high schools as well, to making sure we're creating programs at the school level, having the business community saying this is where we need them, the skills to be trained in, so that they're trained in those jobs for the future. High tech, advanced manufacturing, biotech, list goes on. We have to make sure we're putting them on career paths so that they're going to have a job, you know, here in New Hampshire after they graduate here. And so businesses know that the skilled labor will be right here in New Hampshire as well.
And I'm sure you've covered that on your website
I have,
too, right?
Absolutely, Kathy.
Well, I'm looking at that clock,
I know.
and I want you now to be able to look at that camera and tell people why they have to vote for Kevin.
Well, folks, look at, I mean, if you go on my website, kevinsmithforgovernor.com, you will see that I've been talking about the real issues that are affecting New Hampshire, whether they're in health insurance reform, bringing more businesses here through deregulating small business, having a long-term energy plan because we have to stop paying some of the highest electricity costs in the state. All these different areas of challenges that we need to face over the next 10 years, and I believe I've put forward the most bold vision to make us into the most economically competitive state in the country, and also a specific economic plan that will get us over these challenges. And I also am uniquely qualified, not just because I think I bring the best ideas to the table, but I have the experience in getting it done on the state government level, having served in the legislature, having served under a former governor, having run a state agency and gotten good reforms on the inside, but having also served in the private sector and fought for good, conservative, pro-business policy on the outside as well. The governor's office, it's a 2-year term. It means there's no time for on-the-job training. You better know what your plan is when you're going in there and how you're going to go about executing that plan. You got to be ready to roll on day one. And Kathy, rest assured, if I'm the next governor, I'll be ready to go on that first day.
Kevin, can I get you back again?
Absolutely. Be happy to do it.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And Kevin's website is www.kevinsmithforgovernor.com. Go on it. He tells it like it is on there, just as he told it like it is here today. And what is this show all about but telling it like it is? Until the next time, thank you for watching, and you tell it like it is. Bye-bye.